Superman and Lois, Season 3, Episode 11, Complications. Escaped Peia is causing chaos, and so much so that Superman can't find her. Her powers have increased due to Bruno's cure. As it turns out, the cure wasn't a permanent fix. Peia begins losing control of her powers, accidentally kills Bruno's second-in-command. Desperate for help, Mateo runs up to the penthouse, where a device Natalie has left behind detects Mateo's presence, and Natalie comes to help Mateo. Bruno and his guys aren't happy to see Natalie, and then John Henry shows up, and they're really not happy to see him. John Henry tells Bruno that he knows how this feels, and that he's actually there to help. Peia loses more control, but is able to make it outside the building. She is causing power outages and earthquakes, even disrupts Lois's mastectomy. Superman finally locates Peia. Peia tells him that she doesn't want to leave Bruno and Mateo, but Superman points out that it's okay for her to let go, because Bruno and Mateo wouldn't want her to suffer. Peia nods, and Superman flies her above the city, where she loses all control of her power, explodes, and dies. Superman then takes Pia's body back to Mateo and Bruno. Before Peia died, she had asked Superman to tell Bruno and Mateo that she'd love them both forever and always. Later, Bruno makes a deal to cooperate fully with the DoD in exchange for all charges against Mateo being dropped. John Henry promises Bruno that Mateo will be looked after. Also in this episode, Lois went ahead and went through with her double mastectomy, even though the power was spotty before she went into surgery. Jordan's X-ray vision came in, which was quite distressing for him, but Jonathan helped Jordan keep calm and helped him get through it. Kyle was initially angry with Chrissy when he found out that she had known that Clark was Superman, and that she had made him feel stupid when he was insisting that there was someone with powers helping their community. But after dealing with Sarah's issues and reflecting on his own history with alcohol, Kyle forgave Chrissy, and they seem happy again. This brings us to Sarah. I don't know if she's still on medication or regularly seeing her therapist, but Lana and Kyle's answer to Sarah's problems is for her to get a job as a waitress at the diner. I am more than a little surprised that this is how they're choosing to deal with this. Sarah clearly needs a check on her meds. She has a history of mental health issues and a history of suicide attempts. She clearly needs help. This is not the right way to do that. So we'll see how this turns out. At the end of the episode, we see Bizarro walking out of the rubble under Mannheim's townhouse. That is where the episode leaves us. In this episode, there were a few things I wanted to talk about. The parallel between Superman and what he said to Peia about giving her permission to let go, that mirrored the support group that Clark was having trouble dealing with a few episodes ago, as far as being able to tell the person that they care about that it's okay to let go. Clark managed to do that for Peia, so hopefully he won't have to do that for Lois, but we'll just have to wait and see what happens.
At least in this episode, we finally got to see Superman and superhero stuff, so yay. There were parts of this episode that I thought were really well done, but then like you mentioned with Sarah, there was parts of it that just felt like they didn't really think through what they were doing. So this to me was like a split episode. The Peia Superman stuff I thought was pretty good. Chad Coleman again gave a really good performance, especially at the end after Peia died. So there was some high quality stuff in here. But then you had stuff like how they were dealing with Sarah. There was also a decision. I didn't get this decision at all. So Lois's surgery, I understand that she needs to have this surgery to try to prevent the spread anywhere else. When they were having power fluctuations, before she was wheeled into surgery, and the option was, well, the hospital has a generator, let's go ahead and keep the appointment and let's get this surgery over with. To me, anyway, that seemed like an irresponsible decision. The only time that should matter is if somebody's in a life or death situation immediately, like at that time, like if we don't get the surgery done in 20 minutes, this person's going to die. That's when you would have a surgery under a hospital generator. But if you have the option of not going into surgery until the power stabilizes, Lois's surgery, it wasn't at a point where if she had the surgery next week, like it was going to make any difference. I understand in the story, she said, I had to psych myself up just to get to this point. I don't want to have to do this again. But it just felt like forced drama. She went into surgery with the power already fluctuating. And then during the episode, there was this storyline where the power was fluctuating and the surgery was iffy because the power was being disrupted. And this tank of something was going to tip over and Jordan had to zoom in real fast and fix it before anybody could see him. That just to me seemed like that was manufactured drama that didn't need to happen.
I completely agree. Yeah, it would have been one thing if they had written the story so that those power fluctuations weren't happening before the surgery started, because that would have made a lot more sense. This was obvious that this was just forced drama.
Right, because once she was under the knife, yeah, you want to finish that procedure because you're going to have to stitch up everything, try your best to get it over with. But this was happening before she was even wheeled into the OR. She wasn't even under anesthetic or anything yet. She was making the decision, no, let's proceed. Why would the hospital allow her to do that? That doesn't make any sense to me.
A real hospital would not.
So that didn't work for me. I did appreciate that they touched again on season 1 Sarah, and in the first episode when Sarah talked to Jordan about her history and her medications and what she's been through. I appreciate they actually re-brought that up again, so that was good. But we're just going to give you some responsibility and something else to concentrate on and be a waitress. I understand they're probably, hopefully in story, going to have her medications checked. She's going to be seeing her therapist, or continue to see her therapist, I hope. But the way it was presented in the episode just seemed like it was a simplistic view of mental health. If you just get some hard work and you just concentrate on your hard work, that'll fix most of your mental problems. That just didn't work for me.
The age that Sarah is in the show, that's when you start seeing a lot of things like bipolar disorder come into the picture. Usually schizophrenia, you start seeing that by the time somebody is in their mid-20s. Yeah, so there are a lot of mental health issues, largely genetic ones, that show up during this time period. And for them to treat this just as, well, Sarah just needs more structure in her life, she just needs to have this job, that I thought was really a gross mishandling of a topic that they should be giving information on. It's like they completely do not understand mental health at all. I was very surprised by the way that went. Well, I mean, we'll see what happens in this next episode, but that was so poorly done. I was just in awe of how crappy that was.
On the positive end, the part with Peia and Superman, I thought was really well done. And then afterwards, when Clark was talking to Lois, Lois was under anesthetic during surgery, so she wasn't awake during any of this. When Lois was asking what happened to Peia, what's going on, and Clark responded back with, I was the only one that could get to her. I didn't want her to die alone, so I stayed with her until she died. That was, I thought, well done, well presented. And then Lois said something, well, I'm glad you were there for her, because essentially he didn't want her to die alone. And I thought that was well done. I thought the Peia stuff was actually pretty well done in this episode. So I just wish they would have gotten the other pieces of this better.
There were a few other things that I feel like they gave a very sanitized version. For instance, when Lois came out of her anesthesia, if anybody else has ever been under general anesthesia, you know, I don't know. I mean, I was groggy for a week afterward, but then again, maybe I was just having a really bad reaction. She seemed way too coherent as far as how she was able to communicate with Clark, even after they got her home. I don't know how long that had been between that scene and her surgery, but, you know, shouldn't she be dealing with, like, bandages and draining and all sorts of unpleasant things? It should have been painful. She should not have been doing as well. I'm just saying, that's not how that works. I can tell you that right now.
I give them credit for tackling the topic, because the cancer stuff, mostly, I thought was a reasonable portrayal of how that would go down. I didn't really think that they showed the degrading of the chemo as much as I've known people who have been through that. So that part kind of fell short. But at least they were tackling the item of chemotherapy and then the spouse having to deal with potentially losing their partner. So they were tackling the issues. I give them credit for at least tackling the storyline. I just wish they would have handled it a little bit better. I know they're capable. The second part of the story with Peia dying showed a very elaborate and sophisticated understanding of how end of life would be like that. So these same writers can do that. They just chose not to in this case.
Yeah, because there was that one episode that started out with Lois vomiting into the toilet. And granted, they didn't show any vomit, but we could tell what was going on. So for them to sanitize this part the way that they did surprised me.
Again, this is nitpicking. But at the end, when Lois was in bed, she was sore. She even mentioned she was sore. Clark got on the bed to talk to her, and the bed shook up and down. Now, I didn't have the same surgery she did, but I've had my fair share of surgeries. When the bed jiggles after a surgery, that hurts like hell. I used to be like, don't get around me as far as touching the bed or touching the couch because it hurt like hell. It's a nitpick, but when Clark got on the bed and was talking to her, I just was like, dude, you probably should have kept her downstairs, because I know when I had a fairly sophisticated surgery, I was by myself in a downstairs bedroom for a couple of weeks before I could even handle anybody being next to me or around me. And I can only imagine what a scar like that, 2 scars I'm assuming, going under both, those are giant scars. That would hurt like hell. And yeah, I mean, it would seep all over. You don't want to show that on, I guess, family television, but still, you could have done something to make it a little bit more realistic.
I definitely agree with that. Overall, the Mannheim story with Peia, Bruno, and Matteo, this episode I thought was really, really well done. They did show something a bit gory when Peia accidentally killed Bruno's second in command.
Yeah, she used her sonic powers and basically exploded him against the wall or whatever that was.
It was against the side of the train car. Yeah, and she was horrified by that. Matteo was horrified by that. You know, for them to sanitize what Lois was going through post-surgically, it just surprises me. Maybe they just blew all of their budget on red mist. But the really good portion of this episode was definitely Peia's story.
Yep. And Superman and Clark dealing with that.
And Bruno and John Henry just completed their story arc for the season as well, with both men actually coming to an understanding and growing as individuals, with Mannheim taking responsibility for everything, doing this to save Matteo, and then John Henry understanding a bit where Bruno was coming from, telling Bruno he would make sure that Matteo was looked out for. That was really well done. Those 2 character arcs really were well done this season.
I have mixed feelings on how I'm going to recommend this. I would recommend it, but only like half the story was what I'm going to recommend. The other half wasn't bad, but it was far below the level of the first storyline, at least in my opinion.
I would agree with that. Recommend the Mannheim portion of things, and the rest of this episode, yeah, I would just have to give people some warnings about that. Anybody else watch this episode? What were your thoughts on this? Anyone else have experience with this kind of stuff? And find what they did odd, find what they did good. Let us know in the comments.
Take care.